So when we've been talking about original spin um and a bunch of this other stuff, one of the things that we keep coming back to is this, like, that phrase from the Mary Oliver poem, like, let your soft animal, let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. I think is it.
Something like that.
And you do not have to walk on your hands and knees through the desert repenting, like, and
Right.
there's this, like, that quality. And like sometimes when I've been doing this meditation that I've been doing, that feels like part of how I'm deepening my sense of freedom, there's this utter sensuality to it, which really feels connected to the relationship between the word sensual and the word, like, senses. it's
Hmm.
it's like there's just this quality of, like, what am I sensing? What what is how is reality revealing itself to me in this moment, or arising for me, or occurring to me? Like, what's, like, the texture of my skin and the warmth of my body, and it's all very sensual. And if I'm like trying to experience freedom, like, if I'm like sort of aiming to make this move of feeling this fundamental freedom, but it's divorced from that, it's sort of flat and stupid and doesn't really work.
Hmm.
Like, it's like the freedom is, I guess, like, always kind of grounded in my body. And so I think it highlights something about, like, I remember when you guys visited Waterloo for the first time in 2018. Um, and 5.5 years ago now. Um, and at that time, we were using the Arcana map of, like, umbral astral material, and we were sort of mapping astral onto left hemisphere and umbral onto right hemisphere, which is,
Very loosely, but yeah.
yeah,
The
there was something like that
material was also the physical, or it was also like the domain of the right hemisphere. But yes.
in a different way, yeah. Yeah, anyway, point is, in some cases I think we were using that distinction where we would now use the hemisphere distinction. And you were saying something about how something that I seemed to be doing was, like, trying to run Gen 3 or H3 in mind, like, as mind patterns,
Hmm.
which is to say, as left hemispheric um, static structures, or something like that, machinery
Hmm.
algorithms. And that Gene was able to pick up on that, and was thereby, like, rejecting it, sort of being like, no, that's not it. And And so I think I'm seeing more clearly and increasingly shamelessly the failure mode that is, of something like, even just for myself, like, having a model of, like, oh yeah, the thing I need to do is experience my fundamental freedom, or the thing I need to do is whatever with God, or like, but that, like, if that gets encoded as, like, a left hemispheric thing, it's sort of inherently not the thing that it's supposed to be.
I don't think inherently not is quite right. Um, I smell a piece of original spin in um,
I mean,
in
there's a supposed to there, which is interesting.
yes, it's supposed to. There's this. There's a subtle frame here, like um, the left hemisphere mode is the error mode or something like that. Um, like there is an ideal, and falling short of the ideal is bad. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
one of
I think I've got to concede that I was thinking like that, at least in part because of how I said supposed to.
I
So at
know
least
that
simply that.
I know that you don't endorse that way of thinking, but it seems important to catch the thread.
No, no, I mean, it's like, Um, I mean, I don't endorse endorsing one's thinking or not.
Yep. That's why I did it like the
Yeah,
exaggerated.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, we don't
Um,
typically use that frame at all. Um,
but like, hang on. There's another analogy I want to give, but I also do kind of want to stay with what you just said. There was an insight that I had that I think I texted you about this after our last call. Like I was out walking with a friend and I was like, oh, I got stuck in I was saying to the friend that like I've been doing this meditative mindful like action practice over the last few days and or the last few weeks and I'm sort of like, yeah, and it's not really going as well as I hoped. And I noticed a pain there. And there was an inclination to narrativize that pain as so I'm bad,
mhm.
as opposed to feeling that pain as, oh, yeah, it does kind of suck to not be experiencing my freedom all the time. And
Yeah,
having that be my suck that like I could just not like.
there's something related to the spin. It may be just another variation of the spin that feels really adjacent here, which doesn't even require going to I am bad. Um, just something um, uh, yeah, and I've been working on this thing, but it's not really producing the results that I quite want. But that's where I'm like I think that the move I just did, the energetic move of this, but here Badoop, is actually it's like a sibling or another variation on original spin because it's missing the truth, which is I am trying to do this and I'm missing it, and that hurts. Right? Even though it's saying the right words, it's sort of jumping to the word level
Oh, and it fails to just be with the
through it.
pain of it.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that in
Yeah.
that moment you have to demonstrate the emotional processing. There's no have to
No, no.
here.
There's yeah.
It's a weird covering and move on thing, which is not just for, oh, in this interaction. It's doing something funny in terms of the cognition of, yeah, of course I want that thing. But, like, it's not working out that way, so blah, blah, blah. It's like getting into the planning mode so much that you don't actually feel the squishy bit that's there.
Right. Hmm. Anyway, I want to bring in this analogy, which is that when I did a tweet 6 months ago about it was basically capturing an exchange I had with Jess, where basically I said, anyway, so yeah, I was holding this 1 month old baby and it was kind of stirring, and so then I just expanded my ego boundary out to include it, and then it relaxed. And Jess was like, what prompted you to do that? Like how did you get inspired to make that move? Like what? I think she's partially also like impressed. Like she's like, what? Like, and she said something like, and so and then I said like, well, like, the ego, the baby wasn't, doesn't think that we're separate. So I wasn't about to argue with it. Um, so this is on a first order level, this is relevant, but the particularly relevant thing is that somebody I ran into at a party on Sunday um mentioned this tweet and said, I'm curious, from a perspective that is like she was basically she may have been in town for the like secular solstice or something. And the question that she asked was basically something like, you don't think you like psychically communicated with the baby in ways that are like outside of physical parameters, right? And but that was the subtext. What she actually said was, do you know what you did with your body that had that effect?
Mhm.
And I felt into it, and I was like, I mean, first I said I don't think anything here violated physics, just to be clear. Um, or if it did, then our physics is inadequate, but like it all still adds up to normality, blah blah blah. Um, but but I couldn't name what I did because what I did was I just responded having gotten attuned with the baby. And any amount of like, oh, this is what to do with your body in this situation that will communicate to the baby that you're attuned to them is like completely backwards.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could imagine what the person might have been wondering is, let me see. I think a decent analogy might be, um, if you discovered this superpower of being able to notice when you're hungry and responding to it by eating. If this were an uncommon thing and you somehow figured this out,
Yep.
and someone were trying to ask how do you do that? It's like, well, I mean, I could give you an algorithm, which is here are the body sensations, and then I go eat, but that's not how it works,
Hmm.
right? That's really not how it works. It's more like I am the relationship between the physical actions and the experience, or something like that. And so I satisfy my desire. It's something kind of like that. But you think, well, like, yeah, but physically, like you're not suggesting some sort of psychic communication with some sort of abstract, energetic hunger signal floating out in space, are you? Like, no, of course not. Look, physiologically, I'm guessing what's going on is some kind of hormonal cascade that's interacting with my nervous system, and there are parts of my nervous system that I experience as me, the thing that talks, blah, 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 blah. So I can break it down and describe
Right,
actual
but that's
thing.
not how
That
it
has
occurs
nothing
as
to
you're
do
doing
with
it.
how I do
Right.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is related to like other, right hemisphere, left hemisphere stuff, or even just like motor cortex, prefrontal cortex stuff, where it's like you can describe the mechanics behind why basketball players are able to jump in the way that they can and how they need to run in order to get enough whatever, and how we've actually studied our muscles, and you turns it like you can spring further with your muscle if you've like got a bunch of like momentum that you then like somehow insert into the muscle by like breaking your running in a way that makes your muscle springier. Like you can study all that stuff mechanically, but that is completely different from the act of doing it. Like being a
Yeah,
scientist who studies the kinetics of whatever does not let you do this jump.
yeah,
And you don't need to understand it in order to do it.
yeah. To be more precise, it's unrelated to the experience, like
Yeah.
what the experiential interface is with doing the act.
Yeah. Um yeah. Anyway, what I also shared with her was the I described the weenus exercise, which was, I think I had done that twice in the like 2 months before I was holding this baby. So it was almost certainly part of what was on my mind when I was making this move, is I was like, oh, okay, I have my sense of self here, usually, which is like also fake, as Buddhism will regularly point out to you if you listen. But like nonetheless, like some sense of self, and then it's like, okay, well now sense of self has baby in it. And it was just like in some ways I'd practiced making that move using this exercise.
Hmm.
And it was also easy with the baby because kind of as I was saying to Jess in that tweet, like, if I try to extend my ego boundary around you right now, like you might not go for it or something. But like babies actually are quite receptive to sort of just being in a like ego soup. Um,
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it quite this way. It's like I have well-developed ego boundary machinery. So if you try to expand your ego boundary to include mine, it has to dialogue with my machinery.
right. Yeah.
And the babies don't have that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, socio-sensual stuff.
I'm wondering, um, in terms of your gut sense of it, since I know it's hard to describe, 'cause like you started with the whole socio-sensual stuff by saying this is really hard to even start to talk about because what we talk about is stuff we've always talked about. And then there's this thing that's about the embodied understanding of it
Yeah.
and something, and you had some kind of what I would translate as a somatic insight. Um, uh, so trying to convey the somatic insight when it is about what is beyond what language does can be really tricky.
Yeah.
Um, do you have, because of the nature thing, I'm going to have to say some things that do not fit. So please translate. Um, do you have a sense of how much of that I somatically understand? Or how much, or, oh, sorry, that's not quite what I mean. Um, how do you have a sense of whether I have a handle on the thing that you got somatic insight about in this way as opposed to the talky way?
Yeah. I think your question is valid. Like I don't it, my answers are vague, but that's sort of a lack of knowledge on my part, not a moo. Um,
Right?
yeah.
You're not trying to say there's something wrong with the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm sort of like I could imagine a person about whom I would have a very clear answer, and I could imagine a someone you could ask who might have a clearer answer than me about you or someone else. Um,
Cool.
which is not to say that they would be more accurate necessarily.
I
Um,
understand.
like I think there are
This is
people who
related
would
to the chronosis question.
right, right. It's the conosis question on a level that's different from the one we've spent most of our no same level.
I think the reason why gnosis keeps sounding like a magic juice that shows up or an extra factor is because it's beyond the thing that talks.
Hmm. Yeah, so like if we go back and look at the socio-sensual stuff described in pre-conquest consciousness, I'm just sort of like looking up where that word shows up. Um, socio-sensual camaraderie, infant nurture. Um, yeah. So there's this section, sense of truth. As detailed above, socioessential child nurture spawned body language based on tactile exchanges of affect. Infants were quick to notice that the happiness of others made their own lives happier and richer, so they responded accordingly. Soon they realized that the more accurately and fully they conveyed their inner needs and interests, the more quickly rewarding responses were forthcoming. So they displayed true feelings without artifice, as openly as clearly as their tiny frames permitted. The more skilled they were, the happier they were. Indeed, the happier were all. Thus, therefore, tactile talk was affect talk, and affect talk was truth talk. Um, so compelling that even after learning verbal speech, children continued bouncing inner passions back and forth in affect talk. The messages were more emotionally rewarding. They moved quickly and more accurately and were usually deeply evocative. Spoken words did not have the same instant sensuality and were thus more remote from lives sentiently focused. It's a really interesting use of the word sentient.
Hmm.
Um, right? It's like
I would have
sense.
used cognitively.
Pardon?
I would have used cognitive rather than sentient there. That is an interesting use of sentient.
No, no, no. That's the thing. Um, spoken. It's saying the opposite of what you'd be saying if you said cognitive there.
I think I may have misunderstood the sentence then.
Yeah, spoken words did not have the same instant sensuality, and were thus more remote from lives sentiently focused.
Oh yeah, yeah, I did.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah, yeah,
like
I had a spoken.
I kind of misparsed it
I
too.
lost track of which thing the word sentient was being
I
applied
mean,
to.
it's highlighting sentience and senseness, which share an etymology, but it's like words are like less sentient, basically, is what this sentence is saying.
Oh, that's interesting. Sent. So sentence is also related.
Whoa. Judgment. Yeah. So you get Latin sententia, which is like a thought, a way of a thinking, opinion, judgment, decision, or a thought expressed or aphorism.
Because I would have thought the word sentient would have been related to sentence, and that both of those would have to do with basically self-reflection, rather than sensual or sensible relating to the senses.
Yeah, so they both go to Latin sentir, which means to feel, and also had a sense in Latin of perceive or be of opinion.
Hmm.
This is all very related to a book that I'm intending to buy very shortly, which is called Radical Knowing. And it's actually where I first heard the term pre-conquest consciousness. He cites E. Richard Sorensen extensively and then goes on to like make a bunch of cases about stuff. We had a copy at John Street. Um, Connects with Bohemian Dialogue.
Just in terms of pacing, so you're aware at a meta level, I have about an hour left before I'll need
Okay,
to do some other things before an evening call.
cool. I think let's wrap this piece here
Okay.
and stop this recording and say goodbye to anybody who's watching. Um,